right now. NBC News and Msnbc political analyst, former U.S. Senator Claire McCaskill, also former Secretary of Homeland Security in the Obama administration, Jay Johnson. Willie, it's fascinating again. We've had Democrats and everybody else and people in the media and some Republicans wringing their hands, saying the reason why Kamala Harris lost is she didn't focus on the price of eggs. She didn't focus the price of gasoline, a gallon of gasoline, the price of butter. You look at that speech last night, and it was a long list, a collection of cultural grievances that have very little to do with the economy, very little to do with driving down prices, very little to do with the very things that Democrats were supposed to be negligent not talking about during the campaign. The only economic policies that were talked about were economic policies that even Republicans and conservative economists say, hey, that's going to cause higher inflation. But you go down, it was, again, Allie's last guest, Jack LaHutte, talked about how it was almost like ChatGPT wrote that speech, because it was just kind of so predictable. It sounded like campaign speeches. It sounded like former speeches, from his first term, with really very little news. So what happened at the end, you have Republicans that, of course, came out and praised his speech, talking about his common sense revolution. You have Democrats who were concerned about the partisanship, concerned about the tariffs, concerned about the attacks on the institution, concerned about the personal attacks. And, of course, if you look at polls, independents growing more and more concerned that the president of the Republican Party are not focused on first things first. They're chasing around every other shiny object, but still not focused enough on inflation. A couple of final points here. Britt Hume called it the most partisan speech the president's ever delivered to a joint session of Congress. And others with stopwatches said it was the longest, beating out Bill Clinton's 2000 State of the Union speech. I think I was there, Willie.
You were there.
I know this will shock you, but a younger Joe Scarborough sat, watched, clapped, went to the cloakroom, slept for an hour, got up, walked out at the end, fixed my hair, clapped, and said goodnight. It was a long speech. I know Bill Clinton's speech was a long speech. Last night, a very long speech.
Well, Bill Clinton's 2000 State of the Union, his last, was the previous record holder. Many historians thought it would never be broken. Donald Trump did break it last night. 100 minutes is the official time on the speech last night. That's just the length. But in terms of the substance of it, first of all, inflation clearly is on his mind, because he did talk about the price of eggs, only to blame Joe Biden for the price of eggs. So he knows there's a problem with inflation, which had been, as a matter of fact, ticking down under President Biden, and now that progress has flatlined, as Steve Ratner pointed out to us. And if you're talking about making America affordable again, as he said in that clip we just played, a good way not to do that is to impose 25% tariffs on our biggest trading partners, which obviously will raise the price of so many goods, as again Steve Ratner laid out in his charts for us. And also, just in terms of, we can say it again, this mandate that he keeps claiming he had. Yes, he won the popular vote by a plurality. He won 49.8% of the vote. He won by 1.5 points over Kamala Harris, just over 2 million votes. So with all that in mind, Claire McCaskill, what did you make of what you saw last night as someone who has sat through a few similar addresses in that chamber?
I found myself longing last night for the days when Democrats were trying to decide whether they should stand up and clap or not. It's a very different atmosphere there now. And the argument among senators yesterday was whether or not to go. I know Americans that are really distressed by what Trump is doing, want the Democrats to do more. I'm not sure exactly what they could have done last night that would have pleased America and that would have maintained their ability to get that 15% of the vote that Trump got, of people who don't like him. But I got to tell you, and I think Joe will appreciate this, the biggest laugh line in the speech was that he was going to balance the budget. I mean, I was surprised everybody just didn't break out in raucous laughter. I mean, what a joke. There is no way this guy in any way is going to come close to balancing a budget. He did record deficits in debt the last time he was in office. That will happen again unless he cuts programs for his voters. That's the dilemma that they face right now. They got to cut programs, Medicaid, stuff to farmers. They've got to do all that to even fund the tax cuts that are already in place, much less the laundry list of stuff that is never going to happen that he named last night that made every Republican in the room wince when he talked about all these new tax cuts that are never going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, you look at what he said in the 2016 campaign. He promised that he was going to balance the budget and pay off the debt. He increased deficits and he increased America's national debt more in 4 years than all the preceding 44 presidents before him. And now, you know, if you look, Jonathan Lemire, at the economic situation that we're in, where you look at the fiscal situation we're in today, we've got a $36 trillion debt. If Republicans do what they say they're going to do, if they pass the Trump tax cuts, if they continue spending the way they're talking about spending, you're actually going to see a $20 trillion increase in the federal debt over the next decade. And that's from the OMB. That's from the Congressional Budget Office. That's just unheard of. Like, and I don't know an economist that thinks this country can go from having a $36 trillion debt to a $56 trillion debt over the next decade and not be crippled by that. I mean, that's going to cause massive shockwaves for the U.S. economy. So, again, we're talking about all these other things. Last night, all of these hot-button issues, all these culture war issues, and people chanting USA, USA, when, you know, in response to Donald Trump saying he had one of the biggest landslides ever. That, like, doesn't erase the reality. And I keep worrying that this deficit, and even Republicans know this. Where's the Freedom Caucus? They claim to be for small government. This budget that they're pushing forward is going to blow a $20 trillion hole in America's national debt, which is stealing not only from our children, it's stealing from us. And yet he's saying he's going to balance the budget last night. One of the most meaningless lines of a 100-minute speech.
Yeah, first of all, the idea that it was this mandate and historic landslide. President Obama won by bigger margins twice than what Donald Trump did this time around. And you're right, there's no serious proposal on the Hill from Republicans to balance the budget. They know it can't be done right now, especially if they forge forward with these tax cuts, which seems to be